check for us there. You're very welcome to the seminar this evening. We'll take about an hour. And this evening, I'm joined by Stuart Mills, who is the IPM Specialist with Fargo, based down in the south coast of England, near Littlehampton, in the sunny southern coast. We're also joined by my nursery stock colleague, Donald Flanagan, who is here, thanks be to God, this evening, because he helped me out of a technological breakdown. So you're very welcome, everybody. We can't see you, but we know you're there. So just to give you an introduction, over the last decade, there's been a lot of changes with the use of pesticides in Ireland. And you all know as growers that the amount of insecticides in particular, and some of the fungicides are being reduced, and the amount of pesticides particularly available to use are decreasing. And the amount of biological control agents and integrated pest management products are increasing. So with that in mind, the whole idea of IPM is to have a balance between the chemical, the biological and cultural methods of control. The days of using just pesticides or insecticides are pretty much finished. So with that in mind, I invited Stuart to come to talk to us. We've been having dealings with Fargo for many years, particularly with Neil Hellier. He's been over talking at nursery stock conferences, soft fruit conferences, and so on. And he was always fantastic. I always found him amazing. And I'm sure Stuart is equally amazing. So I'd like to thank Colin Matthews from NAD, who Fargo have commercial dealings with. I'd like to thank him for helping to organize this, and to Stuart for his time, because he said to me he's up to his eyeballs doing farm visits and grower visits. So Stuart, would you like to kick off? The floor is yours.
I can do indeed. What I'll do is I'll share my screen and then just introduce myself a little bit. Let's see. Right. Let me just get this going.
That's great. We can see your screen now.
Yeah. Perfect. Just going to get it up. Right. Everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Lovely. Let me just minimize this a little bit so that I can see what's on there. That's better. Okay, so I'm Stuart Mills, IPM Specialist at Fargo Ltd. And I'm sort of following on a little bit from Neil, I suppose, really, who is a very hard act to follow. Let me just try and get that back in, that's better. So been in the industry about 35 years, covering a range of crops, really, crop protection and such like. And I live on the south coast and in England. And we've got a very large fruit industry here. And it's increasing in size all the time and taking up more and more area. So soft fruit has obviously become very, very important. All right, let me just make sure this works. It does, thank goodness for that. Right, just before we go off into the nice sort of technical sounding stuff and all the exciting bits and pieces, just want to talk about the basics very briefly. Just a couple of quick stories that have come up in the last couple of months, just show how important it is to get the basics right. I was visiting a strawberry grower, and they'd done a wonderful job of cleaning out the tunnels, and they'd quite pleased. And we went in to have a look round, and the crop was wonderful and clean. But unfortunately, when they were taking out the plants, some had actually dropped to the ground, and they had rooted in. And although the crop was clean, we were finding aphids consistently on the plants that had fallen to the ground and rooted in. I think it just shows that a few minutes just extra pulling up those plants would have saved them an awful lot of problems, perhaps later in the future. The second sort of story is just from a grower who contacted me about SWD control on grapes. And we were having a long chat, and he said, well, I dump all my fruit at the bottom of the field. I shouldn't be doing that, really, should I? And I just turned around and said, no. And he knew he was doing wrong. He knew he shouldn't have been doing it, but he was still doing it. And it's just this point about getting the basics right before you start to look at these more advanced things, I think. Yeah. So why in the UK, or very similar to what you're doing, why are we having to move in this direction of looking for alternatives? We've lost an awful lot of conventional pesticides, a lot of new pests and older pests that have come back to haunt us. Sustainability, environmental concerns, economics, growth of the sector, which is huge in the South Coast. and technology and research are all coming along. And this is causing us to have to look at things in a different way now. In the UK, I run a forum and we do a pesticide update. And this is just an example of what we've lost in the last year and what we're going to lose as well. There's a lot more coming up. And in the pesticide update I do, there's actually about 5 pages of this. I've only put in one just for example, but unfortunately, we are losing an awful lot of pesticides, and the pesticides we're keeping, their approvals are changing quite rapidly. The MAP number, for those who don't know, is very similar to your PCS number. It's the approval number. But you can see we've either lost products or actually we are getting to the stage where they are coming back as new numbers, but unfortunately the approvals may be slightly different. We have had a few new products come through in the last few years, and a very useful one was Prolectus, which came across with botrytis. Unfortunately, this has actually been discontinued by the manufacturer due to an odour on strawberry crops. So even if it's not down to safety of the product, it can be down to these sort of commercial concerns as well that we're losing products as well. And it's products, and it's a bit of a loss really, because it was a useful product on strawberries and grapes. With our approval system in the UK, we use a lot under EMUs, which are off-label approvals. And I'm not going to go through this because, to be honest, it's a bit boring, but this just gives some of the idea of, on those off-label approvals, the sort of restrictions that we're getting now. These can be for thermal checklists for managers, protective equipment for staff, gloves for staff, other restrictions, harvest intervals, and they're making some of the products that we actually have quite difficult to fit in and use on fruit crops. And you can see there's actually quite a lot of restrictions on this sort of shot I've got. We are still getting a new, sorry, thing came up then. We are still getting some new products come through, probably more bio-pesticides than conventional at the moment in the UK. We just had one called Teagasc released, another bacillus-based product, which gives us more control of botrytis and such like on strawberries and outdoor grapes. So we are certainly seeing more biofungicides, more biopesticides coming through, and we'll see more in the future as well. Is that frozen? Sorry, it's just frozen. There we go. A couple of years ago, we also had a product called Romeo released. It's not actually a fungicide, it's a host plant defense inducer. And it's used on strawberries for various diseases, including downy mildew, pale mildew, and botrytis. It actually causes the plant to increase its resistance to these diseases. So it basically defends itself against a range of fungal pathogens. And Romeo has proved a useful addition into the conventional chemistry to actually give us extra control on these sort of products. This sort of enhanced defense lasts for about 7 to 10 days. So it can be a useful addition to eke out those pesticides that we've actually still got. We have been lucky in the UK in the last couple of, well, about the last year, that Certis have released a couple of newer acaricides, mainly aimed at top fruit and edibles, and at the moment not really on soft fruit, but we've been very lucky to see these because we were really starting to struggle with acaricides in the UK. Some of the ones that we did have were starting to become a little bit less effective, or their approvals had changed. And this had caused us to struggle a little bit on some of these pests like two-spotted spider mite. So these new products have come along with some new actives as well, have really sort of given us a boost for controlling spider mite in certain crops. And there's a couple they've released, one called Nisaran and one called Canamite, and I'm sure if they're not in Ireland already, they'll be there at some point, I would have thought. So they really were useful. We were getting very short of acaricides, actually. I think most people know about the use of sticky traps now. And of course, there is the aggregation pheromone available for Western flower thrips. And that's proved to be very successful in enhancing the catch from these sort of traps. It is very important to get the colour of trap right for the pest you're trying to get. And I think there's a very good talk on that about last couple of weeks ago, I think there was. That's on your webinar website. And, you know, if you're trying to catch whitefly, it's no use putting up blue traps because they just won't go for them. We're also seeing now these sort of different patterns and shades, as you can see on the right on traps, to actually enhance and make them more attractive to the pests, such as thrips. And this does seem to give an enhanced catch, and especially when used with something like an aggregation pheromone if available. Some growers take a little bit more of a rudimentary approach to putting these on, and they'll actually stick yellow traps onto blue traps just to create this contrast and increase the catch. And the thrips seem to like to go, especially around the edge of this sort of thing. And even this basic approach does seem to improve catch purely from sticky traps. And a number of growers have done this and found that it is actually worthwhile doing. Don't know whether you've come across the red traps yet.
No.
They've just come out about 6 months to a year ago. We were having terrible trouble with leafhopper, which I know can be a problem on some blackberries and such like. And we were starting to struggle for control of leafhopper. Pesticides is disappearing, and the biologicals, to be honest, on leafhopper are not really that good. There are a few that will help, but certainly they'll only go after the nymphs rather than the adults. What's come along is these red sticky traps, either as the smaller units or as a roller trap. And a lot of growers have actually found them very, very effective for taking out the adults. These have been used in herbs, and they've been used in ornamentals, and they'll be very useful in fruit as well. So red sticky traps are very worthwhile looking for if you've got a leafhopper problem. Just moving a little bit on to some of the new strategies we're starting to see in the UK, which have been sort of mentioned in other talks. I'm only going to go over them briefly. Obviously, traps are used to pull pests onto. We're also seeing more use of general repellents. And I'll talk about those a little bit more in a minute. And we're also looking at attractants to pull pests as well. The aggregation pheromones, such as that used for Western flower thrip, are widely used now. Unfortunately, we've only got Western flower thrip. We haven't really got any others at the moment that I'm aware of. We're seeing some of these general repellents, such as Magipel, which I'll mention briefly in a minute, which are very good for just pushing the pest away. And then obviously the pheromones on the traps pull them in and trap them. And you're also seeing these caromones, which is a scent from a species that attracts another. And a few of these products will, I think, be mentioned a bit later in here and have been mentioned on other webinars and such like. So, and these are very useful for thrips, etc. And there's a couple of products such as Lurum LT and Thripnock, and when put on these sticky traps, certainly increase the catch of thrips and such like from them. So we're seeing a lot more interest in this area really at the moment, and it does seem to be working very well, this combined approach. Just briefly going into Magipel, because it's one that we seem to be seeing a little bit more around. It's basically a general pest repellent and a natural enemy attractant. They've done trials in organic strawberries for capsid and thrips, and these pilot trials seem to have shown a considerable reduction of thrips in the crop. Just a little bit there, used 180 per hectare, lasts for a couple of months. And they're often used with sticky traps and sex pheromones, such as for Western flower thrip, to increase the catch. And something about Magipel is it's not just a general pest repellent, it also attracts those natural enemies into the crop as well, which can give quite great benefits. So this sort of product, I think we're going to see a lot more of in the future, certainly. Some new pests and old friends. I think old friends might be a little bit optimistic. Spotted ring drosophila remains a major pest in the UK, and I will just be going over that a little bit in a moment. Brown marmorated stink bug, I don't know whether you've come across that yet, but it has certainly been found in the UK in a couple of places. Thrips have become quite a major problem and major concern for growers in the UK, and they'll be covered a little bit more. And things like raspberry cane and blackberry leaf midges and blackcurrant gall mites have probably become a little bit more prevalent with the loss of certain pesticides. Vine weevil, don't tend to hear quite so much about it, but I'll mention that a bit later. But there's new strategies of doing little and often certainly seem to have got on top of that problem to a greater degree now. Aphids and whitefly obviously remain a problem. Leaf hoppers we do see a little bit more around now, and spider mites certainly do, especially in a hot summer, become a bit of an issue. We're lucky that AHDB, the sort of research levy board, has kept its support going, and the Scepter Plus project has really delivered some really useful projects in the UK. And they sort of deliver applied research to high priority pest, disease and weed problems. And there's certainly some huge amounts of information coming out of there, and off-label approvals and strategies and such like that have really helped a lot of people. And there's still a lot of ongoing trials in soft fruit crops for pests such as spotted ring, drosophila, etc., and indeed capsids. So we're still very well supported at the moment by the AHDB, but how long that will last with the ballot results, we don't know. Aphids, probably one of our major things we saw. And as I said at the beginning, they'd been left on the plants that had been left in the tunnel. So we're seeing more mixes of parasitic wasps used now, I think is safe to say. And you can see on the right that there's a couple of examples there, and they're quite targeted to strawberry or berry. So we're actually seeing them much more targeted to the crop now. There's a lot more interest in the use of banker plants as well. We've always used them, I would say, but certainly using wheat and such like, where you get the grain aphid, and people like to build up the numbers of Ophidius and such like on that. Of course, there's no risk to them actually going into the crop and causing a problem. So we're certainly seeing a lot more interest in the use of banker plants at the moment, using wheat and such like. And we're also seeing quite extensive use of other predators such as lacewing in certain other crops, and we're probably going to see more of that in fruit at some point or other. Whitefly. A couple of years ago, the fruit industry had a bit of a dip, and some people almost gave up on their crops and didn't do much with it. And there was a huge explosion of whitefly that got out of hand and actually went on to other nurseries. So whitefly can remain a big problem. I think it's wise to remember that if you're using Incasia and such like, it's only going to control the glasshouse whitefly, really. If you're getting other species of whitefly, like the honeysuckle whitefly, etc., then really Incasia is not going to do you much good. So you would be looking much more at something like a Repmoceris or Macrophilus to actually control them. Remember though, some of these products may only be releasable under certain sort of conditions, such as glasshouse and such like. Macrolophus has proved to be quite a voracious predator actually of whitefly eggs and young. We're seeing a bit more use of things like Androsaeus swerski and Montdoriensis for whitefly control in other sectors now, and also for thrips as well on certain ones. And these seem to give quite early stage control of eggs and such like, young stages. Seeing very good control of all species by the physical acting products, pesticides such as Plant Invigorator, Flipper, Majestic, etc. But if you use these products, you've got to remember that really you do need to do them as a program of sprays. It's no good just doing a one-off spray. You need to do a couple of sprays, really. And under the correct conditions, Bavaria-based products such as Botanigard do give very good results, incredibly good results. Just be careful to pay attention to weeds around the crop and tunnels. We do find a lot of whitefly will be there hanging around over winter or such like, ready to come in. So weed control around the tunnels can be quite important actually. And of course, yellow sticky traps do very good control of whitefly. I've put down mites, but we're also really talking about two-spotted spider mite. Ambersaeus andersonii been used very successfully early in the season for broad mites and also for early control of two-spotted spider mite. And Phytocelia still remains one of our best controls for two-spotted spider mite, certainly. But it's important to remember Phytocelia, if it does get too hot, it will go down the plant and you will get reduced control. Ambersaeus californicus and Feltiella are other options for control, but they're both relatively expensive and I don't really see them used much in fruit, to be honest with you. And the contact-acting pesticides are very effective on spider mites, especially if you can keep doing them on a regular basis and give good coverage. And I would say that we are quite limited in the caricides in the UK for soft fruits at the moment, and probably going to get a little bit worse. So we are looking a bit more at biologicals at the moment and such like. Spotted wing drosophila has probably become one of the major problems in the UK. A lot of work has been, and research has been done on, there's huge amounts of information available from the UK if you ever need it. And they've been looking at best trapping practice, things like life cycle hosts, and they produced a lot of best practice guides, information on float testing and all these other things. So it has become a major problem in the UK and a real concern and worry. A lot of control is still by pesticides that are given emergency approvals, but these emergency approvals are becoming very difficult to get hold of now. So we will have to see more research into this sort of area. Spotted wing drosophila. So yeah, there's still more research, but things are changing. They used to be advising that you'd be trapping from about March to November, but they're actually now indicating that it's also good to actually trap through the winter as well, in areas of woodland. This actually is from the picture on the right is actually of a tree next to strawberry tunnels. And they found that holly and ilex are both very good early and late food sources for spotted wing drosophila. So if you've got a lot of, if you do ever get the problem and you've got a lot of holly and ivy around, that could be where it's being encouraged from. So there's a lot of trapping now being done in these sort of woodland areas. And I was in the New Forest the other day, and actually they're putting up an awful lot of fruit tunnels, but just across the road, there's a large area of woodland. So they're actually making a problem for themselves already. So there's been a lot of research done on these late and early food sources, and things like holly and ivy have actually been identified. They've also been doing some research on plants that are alternative hosts, but alternative hosts that when the pest attacks, its egg laying or emergence are very poor. And some things like pyracantha have been identified that certain species, the SWD will go for, but their egg emergence is quite poor from it. So they're almost using them as an alternative host to actually reduce emergence. Another pest that we're just starting to see in the UK that I really hope doesn't get established is the brown marmorated stink bug. It's been found a couple of times in the UK where they've been trapping for it in South Kensington and Essex, around the London area, basically. It's a major threat to fruit production and, to be honest, most sectors in the UK and other places. There doesn't seem to be any natural predators. The trapping continues organised by NAB, the Research Institute. And sticky traps are the sex pheromone used, and they've caught a few adults around, certainly. They also at the moment just started to develop a rapid test based on DNA to be able to identify it more easily. Can be easily confused with other similar stink bugs. But it is quite a concern, I think, that we're going to get this in big numbers and be unable to control it, really. I think in the UK, we seem to be seeing a lot of concern over thrips at the moment. For a long time, most growers were very concerned about the Western flower thrips. And this is actually quite well controlled by the use of selective pesticides and biologicals such as Amblyceus cucumeris. However, it seems to be that the rose thrips has taken a bit of a liking to strawberries in particular, and has been found in crops feeding, but not necessarily breeding. There seems to be a bit of a question mark over how much breeding it's actually doing. So cucumeris, because it's attacking the first stage larvae, has not actually proved to be very effective in giving control. So we're having to look at, again, how we control thrips in strawberry crops and such like. There's always something new to make life interesting. So one of the thrips that we haven't seen yet in the strawberry crop is the eastern flower thrips, which is Thripsitosis, but we have seen it broaden from out of ornamentals into herbs now. So it's likely it is expanding its host range. And again, because they congregate together, they're not always well controlled by Amblyceus cucumeris. So we're actually having to look at the use of other Amblyceus products, biologicals, to actually get better control of it. And the one we're tending to find on some of these other thrips that is effective is Montdoriensis. And that's proved to be quite successful on Thripsitosis, and probably would give improved control of some of these other thrips as well. At the moment, there's an ongoing project to identify the pheromones of other species. This is basically to allow them to create more pheromones of these high priority pest species of thrips in the UK, because currently we are very limited as to which ones we can actually trap and find. So there's quite a few projects going on at the moment to identify these things. Nematodes, I know talking to Eamonn, he said it's not so much of a problem at the moment. And I think that's probably a pretty good assessment for the UK as well at the moment. This little and often approach of nematodes seems to have done really well. Not necessarily fruit aimed, but there are a number of new nematode products that are starting to come along, actually into the amateur market, but so they are slowly following into the commercial world. And these include the nematodes that you may see in your garden centre that don't actually require refrigeration. And there's also another one that's just come out in Germany aimed at the amateur market, which is the slow release Nem Plus Depot, which is a Steinonema feltii. It's actually incorporated into compost and growing media. It has an 8-week shelf life and a 6-week release time. And these sort of products, although not widely available at the moment, certainly show us that even nematodes are certainly advancing, and the way we're going to use them in the future is changing.
Sorry, Stuart, just before you go on that, nematodes, is that all for treatment of vine weevil or scarids? Or
I've just put it a little bit more general. For the little and often, we're probably looking at the vine weevil, but these slow release ones are aimed at Steinonema feltii, so that is aimed at scarid, but it will of course also do vine weevil to a degree. These ones that don't require refrigeration, there's a range of them coming out at the moment, but they're all pretty much these products are aimed at the amateur market, but these Nem Plus Depot are just starting to be used in the commercial world in Germany a little bit now. So there's some quite interesting things coming along really at the moment.
Because scarids can be a major problem as well.
They can indeed, can't they? Yeah. When I was at the strawberry grower, he was quite concerned about scarids actually more than anything else, because he was using a heated tunnel to advance them on, and the scarid numbers are actually relatively high. So these sort of products that maybe could be incorporated into the growing bags and such. There's some potential there for the future, really.
Yeah.
And I think they're just starting to be used a little bit in Germany in the commercial sector. So certainly areas to be kept an eye on now, I think, in the nematodes. We're just starting to see another nematode come along, which is Heterohabditis downsy. It sort of fits in a little bit between the Nemesis L and the exhibit line HB. So the Heterohabditis, the normal one, the Steinonema. So it's the temperature range falls in a little bit between, but it supposedly has better activity against vine weevil larvae in raspberry, strawberries, etc. How true that is, I don't know, but that's what I've heard. So there's other nematodes coming along for vine weevil control as well. So I think it's going to be quite an interesting time, and it will certainly keep up with the problem, hopefully. Let everyone copy down the names, because I'm sure there are a few scribbling away.
Well, that's an exciting product anyway. If it lives up to that reputation, 8 to 35 degrees is a great range.
Yeah, I think because we know that some of these nematodes, once they start to get up to about the 30 mark, are starting to struggle, and so it should fit in quite well if we start to see that sort of thing, even for nursery stock and every other sector. Biologicals, we're starting to see a lot of new formulations, types and such like come on the market. Lacewing eggs, hoverflies, phytocelius, blister packs. And so we're actually starting to see quite a good range of other products coming along now. Someone like BioLine also starting to actually select their strains of mites to find the ones that will adapt better to fluctuating conditions and food availability, and sort of be more tolerant of the stress that there is sometimes in conditions which are not always ideal. More eggs are laid and they have longer survival without food, so you get better establishment and population. So BioLine have just started to select, I've just selected Ambersaeus swerski, and I think they're looking at other ones to actually find these strains are a little bit more tolerant of these conditions and fluctuating conditions. There's also, they're starting to look at things like sachets and such like to improve release and such like to improve the mix inside them to give a longer life and such like. So there's quite a lot of research going on into these new and improved sachet designs and such like to get better out of them. But I think they're looking at these mites at the moment with Swirsky, but they will be looking at some other ones as well to find these ones that can cope with these conditions better. I don't know whether a lot of people are using them, but we're starting to see a lot more of these supplementary foods come along for mites and such like now. We are starting to get asked about them a little bit more, and they're mainly there to help establish things like Andersonii, Swirsky, Montdoriensis, etc., to establish them in the crop in the absence of prey. And they tend to allow the numbers to build up. And then, of course, you've got a much stronger, better population when your pests do actually come along. They're based on the prey mite that won't go onto the crop. It's only used to actually breed them normally. So we're seeing a lot of this sort of products, these mite foods, where you apply them to actually help build up and maintain your numbers of predatory mites in the crop. And they're quite interesting products. There's a number of them available from a lot of suppliers now. But one of the main ones I've got information on is obviously this mite food, and they do it so it can be applied by hand or actually through some of the application machinery we have now. So which is why they do the different pack sizes. So in some crops we'll be using these Montdoriensis sachets along, and they will release over a period of time. What they found is by putting the mite food in every 2 weeks, it increases the number of predatory mites on the leaf, as well as the percentage of leaves with predatory mites. So you're actually trying to build them up by feeding them before your pests come in in big numbers. There seems to be quite a lot of interest in that at the moment. I've been asked a few times about it recently, about the use of these sort of supplementary foods for mites and such like. Application, not really going to say much on application. But there's a range of different systems, everything from hand applicators to tractor mounted and even boom systems in glass houses I've seen used. They are very popular because they obviously reduce application time and give you more even distribution of the loose products. A lot of people are a bit worried that they're going to cause damage to the mites and such like. They would have been tested, so you don't see a damage, and indeed, we've put them through some quite harsh machines, some of these biologicals, and they do seem to get away with it remarkably well. A lot of the controlled release systems, such as sachets and such like, are being used a lot now in other crops, particularly to improve distribution. And they also actually started, they did use drones just for application in France for trichogramma, which is the caterpillar egg parasitic wasp. And they used it to apply it to sweet corn. So might be some interesting technologies coming from that, although how flying them down the tunnel will go, I don't know. But especially with some of these products based on eggs and such like, the use of drones to apply them could be quite interesting in the future. Natural predators, just really to say, don't underestimate the control they give, and the more they can be encouraged, the more control you'll get, especially in the wilder areas that you may have some of your pests overwintering. The trials in the past have looked at earwigs and their effects on black currants, and it's found that they really, even on a field, they will go quite a way into a field and actually can give good control of pests. And there's been quite a bit of research on flowers and plants to encourage these natural predators as well. So don't ever underestimate how much good they actually do. If you can encourage them in with things like Magipel, then it certainly does make a big difference. Monitoring. These sort of things, drones and satellite images, are much more agricultural. Not really seeing much of them yet come into our sort of sectors, but I'm afraid the end of the notepad and pen is probably on the horizon, really, much to my distress, because I do find it a lot easier than technology sometimes. And then we're seeing a lot more of these crop monitoring apps coming out for phones and iPads and things like that to record crop walks. And some of the ones I've seen lately actually allow you to include temperatures such as data such as temperature, humidity from sensors, and this gives you a really good overall picture just on your handheld device of what's going on, what's happening, what you find, and such like. And you can also see what's happened in the past as well. And a lot of these can be shared amongst people, so the information, rather than having to be on bits of paper, is shared to all the relevant people very, very quickly. So it's very interesting, these new apps. Prediction, nothing really new. In the 1990s, they were using some of these models and such like to predict things like blackcurrant gall midge. So we've certainly seen these in the past. But I think now with the use of sensors, which we'll talk about in a minute, we're certainly being able to refine these sort of models so that they're really targeted much more to the area you're in even the nursery you're in. There are some disease prediction models around, and I know one of my colleagues has been doing a bit of work with this and the system that we use, which is 30 megahertz sensors. And but these sort of came out by NIAB and East Marlin Research, and it uses temperature and humidity data to predict powdery mildew risk. And some of these early ones did take a lot of extra work to set up properly, but they did produce a simplified version, which just used the BBC data for weather to predict risk. Yeah. And that sort of did create quite useful indications of when things like powdery mildew are going to be a risk. And we even started to see now some of these sort of things for pests such as aphids and whitefly and such like as well. And these sort of things on the powdery mildew, you can use them to determine whether you need to spray at all, whether it's low risk and you use a preventative such as Sonata or AQ10, a couple of products we use in the UK, or in the hot, which are preventative, or if it's a very high risk of powdery mildew using these sort of models, whether you need to go in with the conventional fungicide. And it certainly seems to, using these sort of risk models has allowed people to reduce the number of sprays by anything up to half. And there are other similar models available as well from people like the University of Hertfordshire. And with these sort of models, it's sort of been based much more on these crude sensors or general weather conditions. We're starting to see now a lot of these remote sensor applications, battery operated, So they don't actually need a power source. They can just be put out in the field. They can be put on the bench. They can be put anywhere. And they will mention temperature, moisture, humidity, and such like. And that data can be fed back into these sort of models to actually really refine what the risk is on these sort of pests and diseases now. And you can see here just being used, I think it's on a raspberry crop, just to measure leaf temperature. And that's just a sensor out in the field in the tunnel. Doesn't need to be wired up to anything. It sends its information back to our via a repeater and a gateway to your dashboard on your computer, your handheld device, and you can actually see what's happening. And you get these sort of things with heat maps up in the top right corner, graphs on temperature, humidity, and such like. And these can be combined with these models now to actually give us an alert when risks are actually going to be high for things like powdery mildew or such like, so you can get appropriate control on when you need it. I think we're going to see a lot more of this very refined sensor data being used to predict other things in the future, such as risk of whitefly, emergence of pests and such like in a particular field, let alone a particular county, as we have done in the past. They're very useful systems. Almost at the end, I think. Very interesting and challenging times to be a grower for, I think, for everyone in every sector, to be honest. Someone was discussing, I think a little while ago, about actually breeding plants to be resistant to pests as we do breed them to be resistant to diseases. So I think we're going to see a lot more actual in the future plants that may come out that actually has a resistance to a certain pest actually bred into it, which would be quite interesting. A lot of projects have been undertaken to reduce pesticide use and improve control. So there's always a lot of research and use of soft fruit, but I would also, ask you to keep an eye on the other sectors like herbs, ornamentals, because it's amazing what other things come out along in research on those that you can actually alter, adapt, or use in the soft fruit industry. So always keep an eye on the other sectors, because I think one of the problems at times is that we do tend to get a little bit too focused in our industry and we don't always look at what's happening in other sectors. Thank you for watching. Any questions, you can contact me at Stuart Mills at fargo.co or via NAD.
That's great, Stuart. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
A lot of information to take in. I know just before we kind of delve into the questions and answers, Eamonn, you have a poll running.
That's right.
You had a poll running. I put out a post there in the chat to say people can send in their questions and answers through the Q&A, which I think is anonymous if you like, or you can put them in through the chat if you want. Eamonn, do you want to give the results of the poll?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Questions.
So the question, can you hear me? The question was, what in your experience is the main determining factor in the successful use of biocontrol on your farm? Recent or current use of a pesticide was only 6%. The environmental conditions at the time of application, 31%. And with a whopping 63% identifying when to apply the product to the crop.
Yeah.
Which is, I would have guessed, the biggest challenge, the timing, when to get it, how to apply it, how to feed it. It's complicated, like.
It is, and I think it's also identifying the pests, because sometimes we're putting in the wrong control for a particular pest. And I think particularly with thrips or whitefly and the aphids, we need to know what the pest is to get the right biological control, because otherwise you really are just wasting your money on it. So being able to identify pests or being able to know where to go to find an identification of pest is quite important. But like you say, there's so many factors that you have to take into consideration when you're doing biologicals and such like. It can often be quite daunting for people, to be honest with you.
Yes, it is more complicated. It's a lovely practice, but it's more complicated. It's great to be able to do it.
It is, and I think integrating in with the pesticides as well is an area people do get a little bit scared of at times.
Yeah.
but there's data out there, but there's still some big gaps in the data as well for certain conventional pesticides, I find.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no, like, if you go looking at the side effects of putting on X, Y, and Z pesticide, sometimes there's no data. So
no, there often isn't. I think you just got to make your, base it on the closest pesticide you can find and common sense, to be honest with you.
Right, right. Okay. So that's an interesting. Donald, do you have some questions? Fire away.
Well, there's just one has come in there. Just a moment. Sorry, no, I'll just leave me for a second. I'm sorry, Eamonn, I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay. So there's one question, and Stuart, everybody, if you want to ask questions, just type them into the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah,
and it's all anonymous
as well.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the potential of chitins in IPM?
Not an area.
Chitins, yeah.
Yeah, it's not an area I'm particularly up on, so I think I'll avoid that question at the moment. Thanks.
You can plead the what's that the Americans say? You can plead, I don't know what the
I'll plead that whichever amendment it is.
Amendment, yeah.
There's a lot of things going on at the moment. We're seeing a lot of advances and a lot of promotion of a lot of products, and particularly, I haven't really mentioned biostimulants, but we're seeing a lot of promotion of things like biostimulants at the moment, and it's an area that there's so many things to take in at the moment that I'll be honest, when I'm not sure on something, I think.
Yeah, good stuff.
From the nursery stock side, chitin is a basic substance, and they haven't gained any great traction.
Yeah,
because they're proprietary products, anyone can make them, but I think application of chitin is a bit difficult as well. It's not water soluble, so you have to form an emulsion. So it's probably got potential, but it's also got its challenges.
a lot of things, I think. When we start looking at some of these products and being used practically, they just don't really sort of pay off as much as we'd hoped.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I ask you a question about the banker plants? That was a fantastic system, and it kind of disappeared. I think because the hyperparasitism was occurring, wasn't it? And now it's suddenly back in fashion. Which I'm glad to hear.
It does seem to have come back a little bit, I think. And we're getting a lot more queries on the banker plants at the moment. But like you say, hyperparasitism can be a real problem with it. Can you explain? Can you just kind of explain it? I will do. A few years ago, and it's not a fruit one, but it's an edibles one. It was a chili production unit, and they were using Ophidius wasps, with Ophidius colmanii wasps, for control of aphid. And they actually got a hyperparasite in. Now, the hyperparasite parasitizes the parasite. So basically, what you're doing is all the Ophidius you're putting in there are being killed by another insect that's actually feeding on it and breeding in it. And this basically wiped out all the Ophidius control. So all the aphids actually started to increase, and we actually had to stop using the biologicals for a year and had to go to different ones to allow the hyperparasite numbers to drop so that we could start using the parasitic wasps again.
Okay. And is there any way to avoid that? No,
to be honest with you. It seems to, last couple of years, they haven't had it, but you'll just get a very bad year. And then for a few years, you won't see them, or you'll only see them in numbers that you don't really worry about. And it gets to a certain point that it builds up, and you just have to stop using the Ophidius wasp because it's actually being parasitized by another wasp.
All right. Okay. Okay.
Parasitizing the parasite, basically.
Right. The stink bug. Where is that from? And
Japan, I believe.
I think
it's from Japan.
Right.
Off the top of my head, yeah.
A lot of these strange things seem to come from Asia.
Yeah. Well, America or Asia are usually the places they come from. I know it causes an awful lot of damage out there, and they are very concerned in not just the fruit sector, but all sectors over here, that it will get established and start to breed.
And what's the damage? What is the damage?
Very similar to capsid. So it's feeding and causing damage and damaging the fruit and such like.
Right. Okay. Just when we thought things were going okay.
Well, it's not in Ireland yet, so we're.
Oh, it probably okay. Is.
We've always got to have something new.
Yeah. We'll keep an eye out for it.
We've a question there from Leo. Applying SP plant invigorator seems at 7-day intervals gives good control of aphid if coverage is good. Why is it not used more? Is time taken to apply this product a deterrent?
I think one of the problems is time, because you obviously haven't applied it so frequently. And obviously, SP plant invigorator is also very similar to a detergent. So you're actually stripping the wax off. And if you keep applying it over a long period, then and in the wrong conditions, you could certainly run the risk of scorch and such like. So you do have to be a little bit careful with it. But I think one of the main considerations is time, obviously. It is an excellent
Do you see
product.
growers mixing, maybe alternating plant invigorator, flipper, majestic, or do they kind of stick with one?
I think generally they will
seem
stick
to
with one.
find that works.
Yeah, they generally, I think, will stick with one because I think they get comfortable with one, to be honest. They know how it works.
Okay. Question there, mildew and botrytis predictions. How successful do growers find this program? Any sample of commercial businesses using it?
I know certainly it has been used, and from what I've understand, it's has reduced the number of sprays. And if you can get the right data into it, it can be a very successful thing. And I believe one of my colleagues, Anne, who deals much more with the 30 megahertz system, has actually used it along with some of these sensors to actually predict for the grower when they're most likely to have a problem. So there is a lot more of this sort of interest in it now that we've got this sort of sensing system.
I'll be looking into it. Yeah, it's very interesting that we run a model for the apple growers, and I was involved in the model for the big bud mite and blackcurrants years ago, but they are a very effective way of at least warning you and alerting you that the bug mightn't be out today, but it's very close,
Yeah, I think the more accurate you can get your data into them, isn't it? And the more local you can get your data in, the much more successful they come. And I think that's part of the reason with these sort of remote sensing systems we're seeing now is really allowing accurate data to go into them. And then it's being built on year to give even better results.
And the data is easier to get your hands on now. Our weather service here, you can get daily data and hourly data free and instant from any weather station in Ireland. So it's much easier than it was, say, 5 to 10 years ago.
Yeah, and the great thing about these these remote sensors is you can actually start to get it down to a field or an area of a field as well. So you're really able to get it very precise now. Yeah.
What else have we got?
We've got another one there. Cost-effective aphid control options for strawberries during flowering, ? Calypso was €40 a hectare. Biocontrols such as wasp mixes upwards to €400 a hectare.
Yeah.
Batavia giving 2 to 3 weeks control applied 14 days before flowering. Sequoia and Benevia not suitable with pollinators.
Yeah.
Flipper can cause misshapen fruit. Protac potential phytotoxicity. And SB plant invigorator can cause brown staining. So a lot of different things going on there. Stuart, have you maybe a comment maybe on the first thing would be the price, which was, or the first thing that was mentioned, cost-effective aphid control for strawberries during flowering?
I think when you're looking at during flowering, which is probably one of the most susceptible times to pesticides, then that's perhaps when the use of the biologicals would really come in, because although they're going to be more expensive, the risk of damage and misshapen of fruit and such like is very, very low. When you're applying a lot of pesticides, and we do know that SB will leave a slight deposit from times, and a lot of these pesticides have a sort of problem at one point or other, to avoid those in that key period. So it may not always look as cost effective to use things like the biologicals, but your safety factor is so much more.
Plus, you find outdoors in the likes of Spanish tunnels, you have loads of predators, natural predators. You see millions of them as well, helping you. So.
And there's an awful lot of research going into encouraging even more by the use of flowers and such like around these sort of areas to actually build up these natural predators and such like.
Yeah. Wow. Anything else?
Okay. I think that's our questions come in there.
That's all our questions.
Can I ask about the little and often nematodes?
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about it? How little, how often?
I think this little and often, it came into the ornamental sector, and it originally came in from the fruit sector. And they've stopped using the full rates, and they went down to anything between 20 and 40% of what they'd normally be using, but applying it on a much more frequent sort of application timing. And it does seem to give much improved results over just doing a heavy application and such like. So we've gone over to this little and often rather than the big hits as we used to. And the results have been very, very good. And a lot of growers are now just gone over to doing it little and often, say 20 to 40% of the standard rate, but much more often than they normally would.
And what's the application method for that?
It'll often be through drips, or it can be through spray if they want to drench it on. So there's a number of ways they can do it, but a lot of them are putting it on through drips. And the nematodes seem to go through drips quite happily.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's something in the background there.
Can I ask you just one last question about the vine weevil? Yeah, it's interesting what you said, that you seem to be going through a low vine weevil period, and that's what I'm seeing at the minute. Yeah. So it's like one of these cycles that comes and goes, but just to warn people, the minute you think it's not around, it will be lurking there. Yeah. And you just continue to treat with the nematodes, and that's my experience. That's the best thing to do. Yeah. Treat with the nematodes 2 or 3 times a year with the right product at the right time and at the right temperature, and it's a good insurance policy, isn't it?
I think people, once they stop seeing a problem, they start to think they can ease off. But with vine weevil, you can't, because as soon as you slacken off, it really will come back with a vengeance, and we know it's going to at some point. So you've really got to keep these controls going.
And we've switched over a lot more now from the use of peat to cocoa peat, and I think they prefer cocoa peat. Yeah. So they find it an easier substrate to breed in and to sleep in and do whatever else they do. So people should be warned. Like,
it would be a false economy to suddenly cut back on the nematodes, because you would see a massive problem suddenly flaring up, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask you just one thing about the whole IPM? Like, the horticulture people in general have very good they have a very good hold on IPM strategies, haven't they? Have you seen that in say over the last 20 years?
Yeah.
Very they seem to have a good balance anyway, I think, from my experience from going around the country for a long time.
I think certain sectors, I think in horticulture, that the fruit people have got a really good idea what they're doing now. They're really catching up in the UK, and they've really got the confidence in the biologicals now to integrate with their pesticides. And I would say the same in the other edible sectors as well. But we are perhaps still lacking some of that confidence and knowledge in some of maybe the ornamental sector in the UK on this sort of IPM approach, and we're still having to push it a little bit more and show people what to do. But certainly in the fruit industry and in the edibles industry, they do really get this IPM strategy a lot more, I think.
So when you visit a farmer or a grower, you're effectively training them how to identify the pests and things, because you can't go to every single farm in the.
And
is that what you?
I think it's also sometimes just encouraging their confidence in using it, and in confidence that the biologicals will do a job, and they are doing a job. And I think it's the same with trichogramma. It was a parasitic wasp that we had for eggs of moths and butterflies. It lost its license a couple of years ago, and we haven't yet got it back. But people who were using it, putting it in, and they weren't really thinking about it. And it wasn't until we lost it that they actually realized what a good job it was actually doing. So I think people don't always realize what a good job the biologicals and the natural predators are doing and how they can be integrated in, but it just needs that little bit of extra thought.
Right. Just one last question. What happened to Naturalis? Was there just no commercial interest, or? Naturalis
is still around. Oh. Yeah, it certainly is. It's Met 52. Is that
That's
the one
gone,
you're thinking of? Met 52 went for commercial reasons.
Right.
it just wasn't. I don't think they were making the money on it. I think currently Fargo and other people are looking at alternatives for it, but it's a way away before we see anything, to be honest.
And just the product, the name's gone from my head. It's a plant elicitor that's registered here in Ireland in the last year.
I'm not sure that one.
The name's gone out of my head, but Donald, can you remember the name?
Scion, Sentinel.
No,
I know there are different companies, but
it's classed as a fungicide or an insecticide. A fungicide, but it's a biological. Anyway, no,
I'm not sure on that one.
Okay. Have you any final questions, Donald? Or there's another?
I don't know. I have it was really good. Very informative. So no, I'm really happy to get that rundown as well. Yeah.
It's a bit of a general overview, but hopefully it just pointed a few areas that people can have a look at.
Yeah,
there's one product that I think was mentioned last year that is now approved in Ireland called Tech Bomb.
Tech?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And what, I mean, that sounds like it's going to do an awful lot of damage if you let it off. What's its best use? How's it going to save us?
It is very close to the old Savona.
Okay.
Remember Savona? So it's based on that same chemistry. And people have been using it, certainly. And it's at the moment, I don't think it's got any approvals for fruit in the UK. But people have certainly been using it on other crops, and they found it a little bit safer actually than some of the other contact pesticides.
Okay, that sounds good. Somebody said just messaged in there Plantivax, maybe that plant elicitor.
Don't know
it's
that one.
It's Tegro. Okay, Tegro.
Oh, there he is. Very good.
So listen,
well, on behalf of myself, I'll say thanks very much, and hopefully we'll see you in Ireland sometime again, Stuart. A year or two, but hopefully we'll see you again before too long. And
I hope to be over there soon, yeah.
If you have any spare vaccines, could you send over some? We could do with them.
I think we're hoarding them at the moment.
All right. Okay. They're right too. Listen, thanks very much. It was really informative, and there was over 40 people there watching, 40 different companies from around the country, and we greatly appreciate your time.
No, that's fine.
Stuart, thanks very much.
It's good to see you and to make face, because we're used to dealing with Neil, so you're the new Neil now.
No, Neil is far too hard an act for me to follow, I'm afraid, but I shall do my best.
Thanks very much, and thank you to everybody for tuning in. In about 3 weeks' time, the next seminar, I'm going to have a speaker from Philips Electronics. It'll be the first week in May, and it's looking at the use of LED lights for season extension in strawberries and plant manipulation. So I'm looking forward to that. Listen, thanks everybody.
Not to be outdone, on Tuesday or Thursday, I have a weed control one.
Right. Brilliant. Weed control in nursery stock.
That's right. Yeah.
Just potted or in the field as well?
Both. Container.
Okay, so it'll be worth checking in. Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Right. Thank you very much, everybody, and good night.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Eamonn. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.